My name is Warren Spieker, and I am the managing partner of Continuing Life. And I'm joined today by Lacey Jensen, who's going to help monitor anything that may come across in the chat and to help me out today. The last time we did one of these calls was back in February of 2022. We had done about 20 calls over the preceding couple of years, driven by COVID. And as COVID started to recede from more of a pandemic to an endemic, I believed it was time to stop doing these calls and to shift the responsibility for your communities to be responsive to your needs and communicate about what's going on to your executive directors and your administrators. They are best suited to do that. However, following my sign off, I received a couple of resident feedback, or some folks reached out to me and suggested that I continue these, albeit less frequently. So this is an experiment. Here goes, and at the end, we will be asking for your feedback, please. Our plan for today, I'm going to share just my observations of where we are now since I last did one of these calls a year and a half ago. I'm going to respond to as many of the questions that were submitted as possible. There were quite a few of them. We will not be able to get through all of them. Also, we are trying to keep this high level, so I'm not going to be able to respond to community-specific questions. Your executive directors and administrators are best suited to do that. We will be recording this and posting this onto YouTube, which may help both hearing impaired or folks that are not able to attend. And as I said, we'll stay high level. If ever I say something that appears to be in contrast to what you've heard from your executive director or administrator, they are probably right, so speak to them. And just so you know, Continuing Life, this organization here, aspires to work with all the communities. We are hired to provide support and services to them, but we do not control all the communities. We do not own the communities. In fact, all the communities are separately owned. With that said, I am an owner in some of the communities. So I will occasionally slip colloquially into the terms us or we, and for that I apologize. So where are we now? Well, the good news is that employment has improved. We're not yet back to where we were pre-pandemic. If you were to view this collectively across all communities, there were probably about 2,200 employees. That dipped by about 15% over time to about 1,900, in the low 1,900s. That number has come back today to about 2,300, although it should still be higher because there have been additional communities that now are being operated. Hiring is easier. You are now able to find and attract employees to come work with you. That is an improvement. Inflation appears to be decelerating. Let me emphasize, not going in reverse, but it is decelerating. I'm also proud to share with you that Fortune magazine named your communities the #3 best places to work in the United States of America for aging services. That's rankings that are done based on employee feedback, but done by Fortune magazine. We're extraordinarily proud of that, particularly considering what we've been through the last few years. And socialization appears to be back. So let's remember how far we have come. We're now having parties. There have been some spectacular community anniversaries parties and more. I've read articles in your newsletters about resident ESL programs, or English as a second language, where residents are helping teach some of the employees that work at the communities. They have resumed. Some of your communities have invited Ned Spieker and me to give presentations to their communities, to wide rooms, in fact, some with literally overflowing. We could not do any of this 3 years ago. I'll share with you that there are some new communities that are on the docket that are experiencing record-breaking results. At Wisteria at Warner Center, which is up in the San Fernando Valley, as residents have now had the opportunity to convert from a waiting list to choose a selected residence. It has been the highest ever conversion ratio we've seen in history. Up in Walnut Creek, where there is another community that has been approved, but they're a little later in the stage, we have experienced the highest sales ever in history. So it would appear that people continue to desire the product that you are all living in now. Personally, and I have no statistical information to back this up, but I believe that for myself and for all the rest of our employees, working here and coming into work every day has truly been a gift. You all are reading about the challenges companies are having getting people to come back into the office and the strains on people's mental health. I happen to think people here are better suited as a result of what we have gotten to do for the last several years. And finally, on the good news front, I did not receive a single question from any of you about COVID. That alone is awesome. Now the bad news. Price increases are still higher than anything we've experienced in the last 40 years, and that is particularly hitting healthcare. Food, wages, gasoline, property insurance, and more. I'm sure you all experience it in your day-to-day lives. And not surprisingly, every CCRC is missing their budget this year as a result. The industry feels uncertain politically, economically, and regulatorily. And the healthcare industry has undergone enormous turmoil and has been extremely challenged the last 3 years. The senior housing industry specifically is now expecting a third year of double-digit monthly fee increases. And while that has not been the case at your specific communities, I know many of you who are impacted locally here down in San Diego by the fact that Scripps has stopped taking Medicare Advantage, for example. You are impacted. We get it. I'd like to share my observations on a couple of segments of the healthcare and senior housing industry, specifically that affect you, and that is CCRCs and skilled nursing facilities. On the CCRC front, occupancy is improving, and the industry is about 90% occupied across the board. FYI, your communities are in the mid to high 90%, at least those stabilized communities. The exceptions are Riata Glen and the Glen at Scripps Ranch, which are still kind of technically startup communities. They are in fill-up mode, and they will get there. They opened shortly before COVID. There are a few CCRCs across the nation that have been impacted financially. Fortunately, the sector has performed much better than other elements of senior housing, whether that's assisted living, skilled nursing, or others. There has been an acceleration in consolidation in our space. I believe that to be to keep up with the many regulatory changes, the operational and the financial challenges of this space. So that you know, there is no interest from any of your owners on doing anything like that. And there is no need at any communities to do any consolidation, financially or otherwise. The CCRCs that Continuing Life supports do not operate perfectly, as you well know. But I will tell you, there is not another provider in the country that I would choose to change places with. On the skilled nursing facility front, there are 600 fewer nursing homes today than there were 6 years ago. 100 have closed in the last year alone. Now, you may be asking yourself, why does this matter to me? Well, as I think most of you know, your contract includes access to the adjacent skilled nursing facilities near your campuses. And while I know, or at least I don't think any of you are looking forward to moving to a skilled nursing facility, I suspect that is the reason that many of you chose to move here, for the peace of mind of having that. And Lacey, I think we have a poll here that can you broadcast that and we'll see. And why don't you post that poll? This is about your interest in skilled nursing. Folks, I'm going to ask for your help. You can tell I don't do these often and I don't particularly like to do them. If somebody can wave a hand if you see a poll come up on your screen so I know that this is working. We're trying to submit a poll that you can complete, please. Okay, this time I'm not seeing any shaking or any hands raised, so I'm not sure they're seeing it.
You should see it now.
Okay. Well, take a look. There's something on poll. Okay. Thank you, Rod. I appreciate that. Okay. So we'll wait for a minute and get some results there. Let me explain the business of skilled nursing. It is very, very difficult. It's highly regulated. You are caring for the frailest of the frail. There's increased risk of litigation. It's heart-wrenching work provided by very caring people. The business generates a very poor financial return. These are just some of the reasons why the health centers, and you all have a health center adjacent to your campus, are created in separate legal entities. It is a different form of retirement living than what you all are experiencing now. And it's very focused on care. Again, why do I share all this? I want you to understand the logic of your legal structure. There's sometimes confusion about why that is. These are not technically your employees that work in your community, but they are very much part of the program that I think you bought into. I'm sorry, what was the question? How was it phrased? Okay.
Without a skilled nursing facility.
Okay, thank you. Lacey just shared with me something. She said 90% of you would not have moved into your community if there was no skilled nursing facility. This is what I suspected. So all those employees are not technically in your legal entity. They're very much part of the program that you have chosen to buy into. Besides understanding the logic of the legal structure, I want you to understand the challenges that the entire industry faces because it's getting worse. The government just instituted a minimum staffing mandate for the entire industry. Now, the good news, if you will, harder to find nurses and more expensive to attract them. This will accelerate even more skilled nursing facility closures. Now, here's the silver, I guess. Even though this is a low return business, the health centers and the skilled nursing, your health centers are stable financially and have zero debt. They are flexible. Ironically, some of your same health centers are actually preferred providers, that's a legal term, preferred provider for other CCRCs who have closed their skilled nursing facilities because the business got too tough. The irony is somewhat rich there. By the way, there's no intention of closing any of the skilled nursing facilities here. But I want to share with you a quote that came from Mark Parkinson, who's the head of the American Healthcare Association regarding this. He says more than 287 patients, or about 26% of those currently in nursing homes, would need to be discharged due to lack of available staff if the staffing policy were enacted as proposed. This is all very recent. He says, quote, if all of a sudden we were to lose roughly 25% of our population, the whole thing, the system, would collapse. So it's not just 287,000 folks who are at risk of displacement. It's really everybody who lives in a nursing home, with one exception. There are some very high-end nursing homes that principally take Medicare residents and private pay, and those folks will be fine. That's a pretty small number. The vast number of people, the people principally in Medicaid facilities, they are most at risk. I share this not to take joy in other people's misery. Their intentions are good. even though I question some of the execution. But what I would share with you is that while it's clearly not getting less expensive for all of you to live in these communities, I believe that the value of your contract continues to grow. You will have access to care at a time when others do not, or will have to wait long periods of time should they need it. That is a positive. And we will continue to try and work responsibly on managing budgets and making this as affordable as possible while still maintaining the quality care, particularly in those healthcare centers for you in the future. Now, I've droned on for a fair bit. That's my assessment of what's going on in the industry. And I'd like to now pivot to some of the questions. The first says, there are residents who are very allergic to scents with serious health consequences. Scents, I guess that smells, not pennies. We should be a scent-free community to support those residents. How can this happen? My understanding is actually that all of your communities are scent-free communities currently. I believe that's in your handbook or one of these things, but it's not surprising that we need to do periodic reminders. So my suggestion would be to reach out to your council if it's not, but certainly your executive director or the management team. And I suspect a reminder in the newsletters would probably be, we need to do these things periodically. Second question, what are the major challenges owning and operating an aging community? For reference, the iPhone came on the scene in 2007-8. Water was flowing in the Colorado River, and old folks weren't living as long. Well, of course, there's the normal maintenance, right, that you need to do. And that requires sound economics to be able to continue to reinvest in the community. And I know there's some questions that are coming later about finance, so we'll probably touch on that there. I suspect if you were to actually visit the communities and hit all the 6 communities that are open in California, whether you were looking at one of the newest communities that I just referenced earlier, or if you were going to a community that was over 30 years old, I suspect you would see them and say, these look pretty nice. They shine, and we're very proud of how they look, but we need to keep doing it. Another challenge is balancing the resident wishes or interests, because there's always something new that's come along, with the required capital expenditures to keep the community running. A refresh of the dining room is a lot sexier and more interesting to a resident than replacing the boilers, until you go to shower one day and it's all cold water. So we have to balance those things. And we try and do it. Money is not limitless. What I also expect to be coming in the future, and it's a sign of probably all communities, not just those that are older, is that we will need to balance what you play, and this is euphemistic, but what the elevator music that you play. Is it Frank Sinatra or is it the Rolling Stones? And I suspect there will be some wars fought over what that is. My heart goes out to the management teams who will have to deal with this. CL will not. One last thing, there was a reference to living longer. By the way, we find that to be a positive. I went to a 15-year anniversary a while ago at one of the communities, and there were over 50 people who were original residents that had moved in. And I can't tell you how many of these people came up to me and said, Warren, I didn't expect to be living this long. I didn't expect to still be alive. And we said, well, that's a good thing. So it's a real testament to the communities you live in. We are very proud, and we'll just keep doing it as we have for the last 30 plus years. And we'll do so with your feedback on how we can do it better. Speaking of older, you'll notice that I now have to use these glasses that I didn't have to do a couple of years ago. This next question, I've got a couple of questions about occupancy. This says a high occupancy rate of continuing life properties benefits owners, management, and residents. What is the CL strategy for achieving such rates. Well, I agree with you. We have a mutual interest. I would add another constituent to this, and that is your heirs or your estate also benefits from high occupancy because it means that they get repaid quickly. And if you were to look at reports from your respective communities, I think you'd find that generally your heirs or estates are being paid back at a faster rate than, for example, if you were living at a home in your home and had to then go hire a real estate agent, list the house, sell it, and wait for escrow to close. And that's a testament to the marketing teams. It's a testament to the long waiting lists at the communities, et cetera. What can you do? Well, for one thing, if I can make a little pitch here, referrals cost you nothing. We welcome them. Please submit them. And by the way, have your friends living with you. That will help bring down the marketing expenses, which is probably a good segue. Marketing is needed, and it is needed for forever. It's a necessary expense, folks. You want to be able to have somebody else reserve your residence when you pass many, many years from now. The communities are doing extremely well occupancy-wise compared to the industry, as I referenced earlier. And it's a real testament to the scale of the communities, which allows us to spend the appropriate amount in marketing. And it's a real testament to the great people that are doing the work with the residency counselors. I'm very proud. I think they're excellent. I actually, a little bit of chest thumping here. I think that your communities do it, frankly, among the best in the industry. The next question says, why is it so hard to reach 95% occupancy? What payments are triggered at that point? And I think this is a question probably coming from one of the new communities in terms of the trigger. And what this person's really referencing is that at 95% for a new community, that's when it triggers the process with which payments are made annually on the master trust loan. This really doesn't have anything to do with your repayments of your entrance fees. It's more of a technical thing, but that's what happens upon 95% for a new community. The stabilized communities have been doing this for years. Why is this so hard? Well, let me do this. The nice thing is I can all see it here. I would like to please have a show of hands. Please, everybody raise your hand. If you were just thrilled and excited to leave your house of 30, 40, 50 years, and you have spent your whole lifetime dreaming of moving into a retirement community, please raise your hands. I don't see all of you. I see one hand going up, but I'm not seeing a lot here, folks. And okay, maybe there's one or two more. But listen, this is hard. The decision you made was hard. It was wise. I think it was foresighted, but it was not easy. And so trying, particularly at a new community, to reserve hundreds of homes, because your communities are larger than the typical CCRC in the industry, it's just hard. For what it's worth, the two startup communities are currently 88% and 91% occupied. I suspect they will hit that 95% number next year, just like all the stabilized communities, which are 95% or greater. So it's coming. Don't forget to send your referrals. The next question is, what are the annual operating margin, in parentheses, net operating income, goals of the owners as percentage of operating revenues in the years 2024, 2025, and 2026 and beyond? Would you give the residents a rational explanation about these goals? Why don't I start by just explaining what net operating income is? And I'm going to keep it really simple. So for you finance people, please don't, crucify me later for not using the technical explanation. A simple way to think of this is it's your cash monthly fees, less all the expenses to run the community. It's not things like if you looked at an audited financial statement, this does not include depreciation. It does not include capital expenditures or things of that like amortization, et cetera. By the way, I think it's important to also distinguish that while that's viewed and it's a metric that's usually talked about during the budget process, NOI or net operating income, that's not actually cash to the owners. I prefer to look at cash from operations because that's the number that is the amount of return generated after you put all the capital expenditures and other things, which I'll mention in just a minute. So let me answer the question. The goal for any of the owners is to have a 20% operating margin. So that's basically, you can understand the income divided into the revenues. 20% operating margin at a stabilized community. Now, let me explain. I've used the term stabilized a bit. A stabilized community is, for example, Morningside or La Costa Glen or University Village. These communities have been around for a long time. They've matured. There's a number of residents that are now living at the health center using what we use the term purchased healthcare. They're using services over there. So this does not apply to a Stone Ridge Creek, to a Riata Glen, to the Glen at Scripps Ranch. You are, I don't know, we call you immature communities. I don't know, you're not stabilized communities. You're young. And so you're not there yet. In fact, your margins would probably be higher or expected to be higher, and those numbers will come down over time as the number of residents using purchased healthcare, using the health center goes up. A short way of looking at this is the communities are generally most profitable from an operating margin in the early years, and that number goes down over time because of the increased use of purchased healthcare. The other part is you ask, why do you need this? Well, there's several reasons. For one, I just mentioned you need to be able to reinvest in the community. So long-term capital expenditures are not coming out of your budgets. Those are paid by the owners, and there needs to be cash to do that. It also helps fund reserves. It provides a return to those owners. And it also provides a positive kind of margin, if you will, so that when there are fluctuations in the budget, and I mentioned that this year every single community is missing their budget, you've got some room, some maneuverability. The last thing you'd want to hear is, "I'm sorry, folks, we're not making money here, so we're cutting the food budget, or we're stopping resident health services." You wouldn't like that. This next question is another finance one. It says, first, regarding the increase in minimum wages, I agree those raises are needed and think we must meet or surpass the market wage to keep good people. To cover the costs, which I assume CL will pass on to us, how about more of an assessment like is done with timeshares or homeowners associations or golf clubs for unexpected costs like weather damage and blah, blah, blah. By the way, that's me reading. That's not my terminology. That way, the assessment would ensure the money goes to wages and no percentage goes to management. First, I want to just re-clarify something I said at the beginning. Continuing life does not make the determination. Your CCRCs will make the determination. And just to bring everybody up, everybody on the same page, I think this is referring to two recent bills going through the California legislature. One raised the fast food minimum wage to $20 an hour. That has already been passed. It's been signed by the governor. And because we compete for labor in that space, if you can go get $20 an hour at McDonald's, that's going to obviously put pressure on a retirement community here where we are. By the way, the rest of the minimum wage in California is $16 an hour. I think it's around there. Anyway, the second bill is called SB 525 or Senate Bill 525. This is known as the healthcare minimum wage. This also has passed out of the legislature and it is sitting on the governor's desk, but he has not yet signed it. And this will raise if he signs this, this would raise the minimum wage next to June to $21 an hour. And then over the next couple of years, raise it to $25 an hour. So I think that's just to set the table. That's, I think, what this question is referring to. Let me take a step back and explain the budgeting process, folks. The communities do what's called a bottoms-up budgeting process. They start from scratch. This is not just take last year's monthly fee increase, add a couple of percent, and off you go. Assuming all other expenses were equal, or the expenses when an expense went down, your monthly fees conceivably would go down. That's just not been our experience. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that there were only two expenses in a retirement community: food and labor. And let's assume in this utopian space, food never increases. The cost of food never increases. It stays flat. Well, my experience is that labor increases almost every year. It may vary how much, but it increases almost every year. So even though food didn't increase at all, the next year when labor costs went up, whether it's due to the minimum wage laws or just market pressures, your monthly fees would need to go up because the costs increased to manage that community, even though food didn't change. Now, let me give you another situation. Let's just go back to, again, there's just food and labor. And let's say the resident council, based on your feedback, said, hey, we've determined that we no longer think we need food service in breakfast or lunch. We don't need it, only dinner. Well, all of a sudden, you could now reduce your labor costs, even with labor increasing in just the per capita, you could reduce the number of workers significantly. That would result in your monthly fee going down the next year. That just has not typically been in our experience. As one resident council member said to me a while ago, he said, Warren, I don't want any of the services to change, but I don't want my monthly fee to go up. That's a conundrum for us. And he said it tongue in cheek, but that's the situation we face. So here's why an assessment would not work in this particular situation. Because labor is going up pretty much every year, it means that if we get an assessment next year for the labor costs, you'd be doing another one the next year, but even higher, and then another one the next year and even higher. Assessments are best used for things like what this resident just mentioned, which is weather damage or something that's a one-time item, not ever to be repeated. That's not what we're talking about here. So I don't think that's appropriate. Now, this person goes on to say, second, it is my understanding that most of the health center residents are private pay. So jack up their rates since they are living in our facility. We should not subsidize non-residential living residents. They should be helping us out instead. Good news. The outsiders do pay higher rates. In fact, the residential living residents, you all residents, get a great deal via purchased healthcare. By way of an example, the cost for an outsider in the skilled nursing facility for the private pay is probably around $14,000 a month, give or take. It varies by location. If you were a resident living in a community, an individual resident, let's say your monthly fee was $6,000, and they're higher or they're lower. By the time you factor in the 2 extra meals you would pay for if you were over at the health center permanently, and say it gets to about $65.50, you're paying $65.50, but you're getting care worth $14,000 a month. It's one of the great benefits of your contract. By the way, if you have a couple, that really gets compelling. Whether you're staying one in residential living and one in the health center, or both of you in the health center, it becomes a real compelling financial value. But I want to offer you another perspective, or offer another perspective to this question. And that is that those residents who are paying the outsider rates, they are helping offset what would otherwise be a big cost to you. In fact, I would posit that they are helping you out currently. I've referred in the past to stabilized communities versus what I call immature communities. It takes about 15 years or more for a community to mature and stabilize. In other words, when you open day one, all of you all are healthy and independent. Nobody's going to the health center. And you're hoping to stay that way a really long time. But I know you want the ability to be able to go there if you need it. Assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, you want it there, which means we have to have nurses and housekeepers and maintenance workers and activities and all kinds of things going on over there, even though you're all healthy and nobody needs the care. Well, that comes with a huge operational cost. The building's empty. Just to give you some numbers on this, folks, the community that opened in San Juan Capistrano a few years ago, called The Orchards, over the first 3 years it opened, sustained over $5 million of operating losses as they were trying to fill that building, mostly with outsiders, but also with community residents coming over. That is not unique to COVID. We saw the same thing happen up at Creekview, up in the Bay Area in Pleasanton, and we're experiencing the same thing, actually a little bit worse, over in Scripps Ranch at Ridgeview. So this is kind of a constant. The owners absorb those losses, and they are willing to do so. But if residents suddenly said, you know, we just don't want outsiders in that healthcare facility, we want it to be for us alone, and you know that it's going to take 15 years for a community to mature, I suspect that the owners would have a different approach to this and probably be less willing to absorb all those costs for 15 years. And they'd say, okay, you know, we'll rearrange things, we'll keep it empty for you, but now this is going to be part of your costs. And we figure out how legally to structure that, but that would become a driver of your monthly fees. And I don't think you would like that, because you still have access to the community. It's still terrific. In fact, it's a win-win situation where the outsiders are helping subsidize you and those what would otherwise be greater losses. And by the way, the win for them is they're getting care levels at this high level from terrific staff. And then it's available for you when you need it. Let me just stop that point on this. If you see one of our nurses, what they do, well, they are angels. Give them a hug. They're terrific, even if you're not using healthcare yet. Okay, maybe I will have room for one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap this up. And this is probably a good segue. This says, wouldn't the CL facilities be exempt from SB 525 because none employs more than 10,000 employees? And this another question on the same thing says, if Senate Bill 525 is passed, how will it affect the residents' cost here at the community? My understanding, and I'm not the legislative expert, but is that 10,000 number that was referred to here simply just means that larger healthcare organizations like certain hospital systems simply have to pay a higher minimum wage, and they increase it faster. It doesn't exclude us. It means that just we're in a different category. We pay 21 versus 23. So that doesn't exclude us from the law. For communities like yours, a $21 minimum wage, just to put this in frame of reference, is about a 31% increase over where the minimum wage is now. Not everybody's getting paid the minimum wage, mind you, but as soon as you raise the minimum, that puts wage pressure on everything above it. We have not analyzed the impact of what that would be. Your accounting directors, your executive directors, your directors of all the departments in conjunction with your different resident councils are working together on the budget for this next year. Since this has not been passed, it wasn't reasonable to try and factor this into next year. If this passes, I do think it would be significant, but I don't have any metrics to tell you exactly what it is. And I will just offer that while, you know, this person in the earlier questions was very supportive of the minimum wages going up and paying people, I know there's also people that feel differently and who have written letters to the governor encouraging the governor not to sign this because of the pressure it would put on monthly fees. Let me start to wrap this up. Lisa, I'm going to ask you to do another poll here, please. Folks, I started this by saying that I have intentionally stopped doing these because I think your executive directors and administrators are best suited to give you feedback about your communities and to be responsive to your needs. Some of you who have attended these for the last few years also know that I'm not really a big fan of public speaking, so I do have a hidden agenda here. I don't like doing these. So we're going to do a poll, and it's going to say, is this worthwhile and should we continue periodically? In other words, not frequently, or should we just drop this and have the communities do this themselves because they can be more responsive? If I need to be more direct about which way I'd encourage you to vote, it would be just vote no. But I will listen to your feedback and try and be responsive as we all try and be responsive to your interests. So I'm going to post that while I wrap this up, which will give us a couple of minutes for you to fill out the poll before we close.
Another question?
I don't, I've got a whole bunch of, I've got a page of questions. I just can't get to them all. Thank you. Is there anything in the chat that I urgently need to address or that I messed up or anything like that? Okay, we'll go over that later. And I'll do my best to respond. I think some of these questions maybe even had names on them. I'll see if I can't try and get back to you. I can't promise that. It is that time of year where I know a number of your committees are working on your respective employee appreciation funds. I want to thank you. It is so meaningful to our employees. Whether that employee is front-facing or serving you dinner, or whether they're the back of the house cooking a meal or doing the laundry. Whether that's somebody who's serving you today in residential living, or whether it's the nurse that will be serving you tomorrow over in the health center. It is enormously appreciated, and they like hearing the thank you. For any residents, particularly you new folks, that have not attended one of these presentations, whether they do it at the health center or at the residential living, it is often an event that is fun, with tears of joy, and a lot of appreciation, and it bonds the relationship between you and the employees. I encourage you to attend if you can make time. Thank you, committees, Employee Appreciation Fund committees, for making it happen. And I will close with a request. Oh, golly, Lacey just said that 84% of you want this to continue. Wrong answer, but I'm on receive. I'm going to close with a request, however. Holidays, events like the Employee Appreciation Fund, there's dinners that are celebrating these kinds of things. These bring out the best in our campuses. It's when we really sense that we are a community. On the other hand, our country is divided politically. And we are headed into an election year. The next year, I expect, based on past history, is probably not likely to see the same sense of community that you all have retained in yours. So could I ask you to please try and be sensitive to your fellow residents, and we reinforce the word community in the communal living that you are all taking part of. We don't all need to think alike, but let's just try and respect each other and be kind to one another. And with that, I will sign off and I will wish you a happy Halloween. Thank you very much for attending.